She wrote it in secret, but never meant to send it. And yet, it arrived. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axon. Let me know in the comments where you're joining us from today. Hearing from you always makes these stories even more special. Now let's begin. You'd think a man like Nero Wolfe, who has the emotional range of a Persian rug and the movement habits of a marble statue, would be immune to the petty dramas of the United States Postal Service. But on a damp Tuesday in March, the sanctity of the brownstone was first breached, not by gunshot or subpoena, but by the crinkled flap of a sealed envelope and the quaver in the voice of the woman who carried it. I was at my desk, halfway through the crossword and wholly uninterested in the rain, when Fritz buzzed from the kitchen to announce that we had a visitor, a Miss Ivy Tennant. She'd called that morning, and I'd put her down as another fluttery soul who needed to cry on Wolfe's orchids. Usually, that sort doesn't make it past the stoop, but this one had a peculiar calm in her tone, like someone who'd rehearsed falling apart and decided not to. When I opened the door, she was already halfway up the steps, umbrella dripping, coat precise. Mid-40s, I guessed, but with the kind of face that had been carefully trained not to let its age show. She had gloves in one hand and a cream-colored envelope in the other, held like it was radioactive. "Mr. Wolfe is expecting you," I said, stepping aside. "Only if he still wants to," she replied. "I'm not sure I do." She walked like someone who'd memorized the layout of the brownstone from stories, each step deliberate, scanning the front room like a stage. I led her to the office, where Wolfe sat in his chair, deep as ever in a book about some obscure Roman general who died poorly. Wolfe didn't look up. "Archie, I said no interruptions until 3. "Yes, sir," I said, "but the lady insists on bringing you mail. Emotional kind." That got him. He closed the book, peered over his glasses, and gave Miss Tennant the kind of stare that usually makes grown men apologize for breathing. "You brought a letter?" Wolfe asked. She nodded. "I did. But it wasn't meant to be delivered." Wolfe didn't ask how she meant to pull that off. He just motioned to the red chair, and she sat like she was being interviewed by a magistrate. "I mailed it last week," she said. "It was a moment of weakness, or strength. Depends who's judging. I thought it would go unnoticed. I thought it wouldn't matter." "But it did," Wolfe said. "It got into the wrong hands," she replied. "Or maybe the right ones, if someone wanted leverage." "What sort of letter was it?" I asked, leaning back. She hesitated. "A confession of something I didn't do." Wolfe's lips curved slightly, his version of an eyebrow raise. "You wrote a confession to a crime you didn't commit." "I wrote it to someone I loved," she said softly. "He died before he could read it. But now, someone else has." That hung in the room like a hanging vine. Beautiful, if you didn't look too close. Wolfe spoke next. "You wish me to retrieve it?" Miss Tennant shook her head. "Number, I wish you to understand what it could destroy, and then help me make sure it doesn't." "Who has it?" Wolfe asked. "I don't know," she said. "But yesterday, I received an anonymous invitation to a dinner I haven't been welcome at in 12 years. She set the envelope on Wolfe's desk. It was thick, unopened, with a red wax seal and no return address. The handwriting was familiar, she said, but she wouldn't tell us whose. "May I read the letter you sent?" Wolfe asked. She bit her lip. "Number, because I didn't keep a copy, but I remember every word." Wolfe let out a breath sharp enough to flutter orchids. "That is unfortunate." I asked the obvious. "Miss Tennant, why come to us now?" She turned to me. Her eyes were clear, but something behind them was burning slow. "Because someone is using my words, and they weren't meant for the living." Wolfe leaned back, tapped his fingertips together. I knew that look. He was interested, not for the money. Miss Tennant's gloves were cashmere but worn. Not for the drama either. No, this was personal in a different way. Wolfe hated disruptions, but he hated the misuse of language even more. "Very well," he said. "Archie will ask you some questions. Then he will attend your dinner." She blinked. "You won't come?" "Certainly not," Wolfe said. "But I may speak." She stood, half smiling for the first time. "You think it can be solved without reading the letter?" Wolfe closed his eyes. "Miss Tennant, language is like dynamite. If someone has lit the fuse, it is not the letter that matters, but the bang it's meant to make." She left the brownstone lighter than she came, though she took the envelope with her. I didn't know yet whether she was the one holding the dynamite or standing too close to it, but the fuse had definitely been lit. She was barely out the door when Wolfe spoke, his voice low and weighted with a tone I recognized immediately. Not curiosity, but something closer to annoyance, dressed as interest. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "Get me everything you can on Miss Ivy Tennant. Birth records, professional affiliations, surviving family, the man she allegedly loved and who now lies conveniently dead. I want no conjecture, just facts." "Any preference for where I start?" "Start with the letter." "That might be a little difficult considering it's in her purse and she's halfway to the curb." Wolfe opened his eyes just enough to flatten me with a stare, then start with the consequences of it. If someone intends to use her words, they will not do so in silence. Find out who invited her to that dinner and why. I nodded, reached for my coat, and paused. "You think the letter was bait?" I think the letter was a trap. Whether it was meant to ensnare Miss Tennant or someone else, I intend to determine who set it." He closed his eyes again, which was Wolfe's version of a period. I left the brownstone with the rain still hanging around like it had paid rent. I flagged a cab, gave the driver the address Miss Tennant had written on a notepad in Wolfe's office, an apartment on the Upper West Side, and settled in to let my thoughts organize themselves. I didn't know if she was playing us or being played, but there was something in her that didn't sit easy with me. She'd held that envelope like a hand grenade without a pin, and while she claimed she didn't know who had the letter now, she'd walked out of Wolfe's office with a seal in her purse and a story only half unfolded. The doorman at her building recognized her name, and after a little smooth talk about being from a private security firm handling a discreet correspondence matter, he let me into the lobby and pointed toward her mailbox. No tampering. Clean. Upstairs, her apartment was dark behind heavy curtains, but the hallway smelled faintly of orange blossom and something else, a sharper note, like burnt matches. No sounds. I didn't knock. It wasn't time yet. Instead, I headed for the address on the invitation she'd shown us. Dinner for the prodigal daughter, in a house where she hadn't set foot in 12 years. That reeked of theatrics, and I'd played enough hands to know when someone was stacking the deck. The house was on East 73rd, a 5-story brownstone with tasteful ironwork and the kind of front stoop that gets featured in real estate porn. A plaque on the gate read, Hollis. That was a name I remembered from a decade-old scandal involving art forgery, tax shelters, and a now-defunct Manhattan gallery. Miss Tennant, if memory served, had once been a curator. I buzzed the intercom. A woman's voice, older and clipped, answered. "Yes?" "Delivery," I said. For whom?" "Ivy Tennant. For tonight's dinner." A pause. "She hasn't arrived." "No, but the letter has." The line went dead. I waited. 20 seconds later, the door clicked. The kind of click that makes you think you've just opened a book with missing pages. Inside, the house was all clean surfaces and tension. The woman who met me at the door was tall, silver-haired, and dressed like someone who didn't believe in second chances. She gave me a long look. "You are?" "Archie Goodwin. Miss Tennant and I share a mutual acquaintance. I'm here to make sure tonight's dinner doesn't explode." She didn't move. "And who is this acquaintance?" "Nero Wolfe." That did it. Her eyes flickered. She stepped back. "I'm Celeste Hollis, Ivy's sister." "Half-sister," I said. She blinked. You've done your homework. Barely started. Mind if I ask? Who sent the invitation? I did, she said flatly. It was time. For reconciliation? For truth. I followed her down a narrow hallway into what used to be a drawing room and now looked like the waiting room of a very stylish inquisition. 4 chairs arranged too deliberately around a low glass table. A crystal decanter with untouched scotch. Everything symmetrical. Everything controlled. Ivy hasn't been here since the night our father died, Celeste said, pouring herself a drink she wouldn't touch. She left before the will was read. Voluntarily. She thought so at the time. And now? She met my gaze, cold and level. Now someone's reminding her of what she wrote that night. I didn't react, but inside something clicked into place. She wrote that letter 12 years ago. Celeste nodded, to a man she was in love with. A man our father despised. And you found the letter? Number Y received a copy of it 3 days ago. No note, no explanation. She opened a drawer and handed me a photocopy. It was blurry, faintly water-stained and unsigned, but it was passionate, confessional, and dangerous in the right hands. It spoke of an argument with her father. A door left open, a voice raised. Something broken. It didn't quite accuse, but it certainly implied. She was in the house the night he died, I said, scanning it. Yes. And the death was ruled natural. Celeste smiled without warmth. He fell down the stairs. Cardiac arrhythmia. No foul play, no investigation. But Ivy left that night and never came back. And this copy came to you. Not Ivy. She didn't respond, which was answer enough. Who else will be at dinner? My husband Jonas, our daughter Lucy, and a guest, someone who also received a copy. I raised an eyebrow. You're holding a summit of silent blackmail victims. You could put it that way, or say we're all suspects in a story someone is trying to finish. That was more than a metaphor. It was a strategy. Someone had reignited a decade-old fire and was watching to see who got burned. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was still in his chair, dabbing his lips with a napkin from lunch. I handed him the copy. He scanned it once, then again, more slowly. She implies, but she does not admit, a clever distinction. Celeste Hollis says someone is distributing copies. Ivy claims she didn't keep one. One of them is lying. Both may be telling the truth selectively, Wolfe murmured. Whoever has the original, or created the copy, had access to her past, and motive to use it now. I nodded. Dinner's at 8. He looked up. You'll attend. I tilted my head. You want me to play messenger or spy? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Both. And carry this. He slid a sealed envelope across the desk. I picked it up. Heavy paper. Wolfe's monogram on the flap. What is it? A letter. Another one? This one I meant to send. He closed his eyes again. And just like that, the brownstone returned to silence. But outside, the game had just begun. At precisely 7:58 p.m., I arrived at the Hollis brownstone again, this time in less of a mood to charm the intercom. I didn't need to. The door opened before I knocked, as if they'd been waiting for me. Lucy Hollis was the one who answered. Ivy's niece. 24, maybe 25. Tall, with a restless, nervous beauty and eyes that looked like they'd memorized every exit in the room. She smiled quickly, like she didn't trust her own face. You're early, she said. I'm punctual, I replied. Archie Goodwin. I know. You're the one Uncle Jonas said looked like a private detective from an old movie. Did he say which one? He said you were too clean to be Bogart, too slick to be Mitchum. I liked Jonas already. She led me through the front parlor and into the dining room, which had the glow of expensive lighting and inherited tension. The table was set for 6. White linen, silver flatware, Center arrangement of lilies and hyacinths. Either someone was trying to impress a wedding party or disguise the smell of something unpleasant. Jonas Hollis rose to greet me. He was a lawyer, I'd learned. Real estate litigation, deep pockets, deeper silences. He had the slow, calculating eyes of someone who'd reviewed too many depositions to be easily surprised. We shook hands. "You here on Wolfe's behalf?" he asked. "Strictly observation," I said. "Unless someone decides to confess something unexpected." He grunted. "In this family, that wouldn't be out of character." Ivy arrived precisely at 8, her coat already off, her chin lifted like she'd walked into the courtroom of a trial she hadn't agreed to attend. She didn't flinch when she saw the extra place at the table, but she did glance at me, just once, like she wanted to confirm that I wasn't going to pull the fire alarm and run. Celeste entered last, not carrying the air of a hostess but a conductor about to start the overture. She nodded to each of us and took her seat at the head of the table. Jonas at the far end. Ivy directly across from Lucy. That left me in the middle, next to the empty seat. Our mystery guest. The room shifted when the doorbell rang. Lucy flinched. Ivy set her fork down before she even touched the salad. Jonas reached for his water glass, and Celeste, with no hesitation, stood and left to answer. She returned with a man in his early 50s, compact frame, silver at the temples, and the smug half-smile of someone who knew more than he was letting on. "This is Dr. Quentin Vale," Celeste said. "Family physician?" I asked. "Former," Ivy replied, her voice brittle. "No longer practicing?" I asked. "No longer trusted," she said. He took his seat, the empty one next to me, and smiled at her like an old wound, reappearing in a mirror. "Still dramatic, Ivy," he said smoothly, "but you've always been good at it." "Not good enough to fake grief," she replied. Jonas cleared his throat like a judge asking for order. Dinner began with chilled soup and minimal conversation. Quentin Vale was clearly not just a guest, he was a provocation. The way Celeste kept glancing at him, the way Lucy avoided his eyes, it all suggested that he was the key that had turned whatever lock kept this family pretending to be functional. After the fish course, Quentin leaned toward me. "You're Wolfe's man. What are you looking for?" "Truth," I said. "Ah, a common affliction in this house. Dangerous, too." I turned toward him. "You received the letter?" He didn't blink. "I did. Copied, of course. But the phrasing, unmistakably Ivy's. Why now?" "Timing is everything, Mr. Goodwin. The past is never a problem. Until someone remembers it." I glanced across the table. Ivy had gone still, her wine untouched. "Where did your copy come from?" I asked. "Mail slot, no return address. Same wax seal Ivy had on hers, I'd wager." I tapped the edge of my plate with my thumb. "How well did you know her father?" "Well enough to dislike him," Vale said, "and for him to dislike me back. Especially after Ivy and I." He didn't finish the sentence. "Didn't need to. You were the recipient of the original letter." He gave a small nod. "She sent it the night he died, but I never got it. At least not then." "So who did?" He glanced around the table. "There's only one mail slot at the Hollis house. Someone else intercepted it." Celeste said nothing, but her shoulders tightened by a degree. Vale continued, "Now someone wants it known. Or wants it believed." Jonas finally leaned forward. "All right. Enough insinuation. If anyone in this room knows who sent those copies, say it. Otherwise, we're just eating accusation and cold fish." Celeste turned to Ivy. "Why come back now?" "Because the letter was meant to die with him," Ivy said. "Not be used by someone else. I didn't send copies. I didn't even have one. If you did, you should have burned it." "It wasn't me," Celeste said calmly. "But someone clearly wants us at each other's throats." Quentin looked at Jonas. "And you?" "Any theories?" Jonas didn't answer directly. I want to know what was in that letter, word for word, because what I read in the copy makes it sound like someone helped Gregory Hollis fall down those stairs. Ivy stood. I'm not doing this. I didn't kill him. I never meant for the letter to be read by anyone but Quentin. It was an emotional, private confession, Lucy said softly. The room turned toward her. You knew about it? I asked. Lucy looked trapped. I read it. Not until last week. It came with no name, no address, just a note that said, You deserve to know what your family buried. She reached into her handbag and produced a copy, folded in thirds, smoother than the others. Wolfe would have called that a minor detail. I call it a smoking gun. I read the copy. It was the same as the others, but someone had taken the time to underline certain lines in red pencil. He said I would regret it. The railing gave way, or he let it. I left the door unlocked. I thought it was over. 3 lines. 3 accusations. Or 3 red herrings. Who knew about this letter back then? I asked. Ivy and I, Vale said. That's all. Not Celeste. No, Ivy said firmly. But Celeste's smile had a new edge. Funny thing. I did find something strange after Father died. A half-burned letter in the fireplace. I didn't know what it was. Not then. Jonas looked at her. You never said that. I thought it was one of his, she said coolly. He burned things often. But the writing was Ivy's. I looked around the table. The letter had never been mailed. The envelope was probably intercepted that same night. Someone had copied it. Someone had waited. And now, someone was playing conductor to a symphony of guilt. Back at the brownstone, I laid the facts out in order for Wolfe, who listened with his eyes closed and his fingers tented like he was about to deliver a eulogy. 3 copies, I concluded. Each delivered anonymously, all recently, all with the same letter, but only Ivy didn't have a copy. Wolfe didn't speak for several seconds. Someone is manipulating sentiment, he finally said. Not for money, for control. Perhaps revenge. And the copies? I asked. They were not made recently, he replied. No, Mr. Goodwin, those were made long ago, by someone who always intended to use them. I asked the obvious. Who? He opened his eyes. Someone who knew Ivy better than she knew herself, and someone who has waited long enough. I nodded slowly. You want me to go back? Number I want them to come to me. He lifted the envelope he'd given me earlier, still sealed, untouched. Send this now, he said, and prepare the office. Tomorrow evening, all of them. I smiled, summoning the suspects. That's very dramatic of you. He grimaced. Bah, it's necessary. And if I am correct, Mr. Goodwin, he didn't finish, just turned back to his book. But I knew that look. He was close. And someone, very soon, was going to wish they'd let the past stay buried. By noon the next day, the invitations had been hand-delivered, signed by Nero Wolfe in his usual fountain pen scrawl, and sealed with that gold-embossed monogram that makes people feel both flattered and mildly threatened. Fritz had polished the chairs in the office twice, despite no one ever noticing if he didn't polish them at all. Wolfe hadn't spoken much since breakfast, but the orchid room door had remained firmly shut all morning, his way of thinking through the thorns. The guest list was short and deeply uncomfortable. Ivy Tennant, Celeste Hollis, Jonas Hollis, Lucy Hollis, and Dr. Quentin Vale. 5 people with tangled ties to a letter, a death, and each other. Saul Panzer had done a quick run last night. Public records, archive directories, a few phone calls to people with long memories, and now I had the whole framework in front of me, neatly typed and paper-clipped. I skimmed again as the clock ticked toward 5. 12 years ago, Gregory Hollis, a patron of the arts, modest tyrant, and, by all accounts, a man whose charity masked a strict internal ledger, had died on the staircase of his home. His death was ruled accidental, despite no witnesses, and a sudden will revision the week before. That revision had split the estate evenly between his daughters. Ivy vanished from the family scene 2 days later. Quentin Vale, once her fiancé and physician to Gregory, had resigned from his practice 6 months after. The gallery Ivy worked for had quietly folded a year later, and now someone had decided to exhume all of that. Not with shovels, but with copies of a letter that should have stayed buried in ash. At precisely 5:15, the doorbell rang. I opened it to Ivy Tennant. She wore the same calm as the first visit, but her eyes gave her away. She'd slept badly, or not at all. She nodded to me and said nothing as I led her into the office. Celeste followed 10 minutes later, with Jonas and Lucy behind her like satellites in different orbits. Quentin arrived last, umbrella folded, coat dry, face composed as ever. He greeted Ivy with a small bow that she didn't return. Wolfe remained seated as always, behind his desk, arms resting lightly on the armrests, gaze heavy and precise. He waited until everyone was seated before he spoke. "You have all come because you received something you were not meant to receive." Silence. "You have all read the letter. You believe it says something about the death of Gregory Hollis. Some of you believe Ivy Tennant wrote it in guilt. Some of you believe she wrote it in fear. What I propose to demonstrate tonight is that she wrote it in pain, nothing more, and that someone else is weaponizing her words to cause harm, possibly to hide their own." Quentin Vale shifted slightly. Celeste folded her hands. Lucy looked at her lap. "I will ask you each for truth. In this room, truth is not a courtesy. It is a requirement. Mr. Goodwin." I stepped forward and laid the 3 copies of the letter on Wolfe's desk. "These were delivered separately," I said. "All identical. Photocopies. Same blur. Same faint smudge in the upper right corner. They were all made from the same original, and that original, I believe, was intercepted 12 years ago." I turned to Ivy. "You wrote the letter. Did you seal it?" "Yes," she said quietly. "I dropped it in the front hall to be posted. But Gregory died the same night. After that, I assumed it never reached Quentin. I never saw it again." "And you didn't make a copy?" "No." Wolfe turned his gaze to Celeste. "You claimed you found a half-burned letter in the fireplace." She nodded. "The morning after he died. It was smoldering. I recognized Ivy's writing, but I couldn't read the whole thing. I thought it was just something personal. I never said anything." "Did you remove it from the grate?" "No." "Did you touch it?" "No." Lucy spoke then, quietly. "But it wasn't gone." Everyone turned to her. "I found a page in my father's desk drawer years later, folded into a book. I didn't know what it meant, and I didn't ask." Wolfe leaned slightly forward. "Which book?" Lucy hesitated. "A collection of essays. Ethics and Power in the Modern State." Jonas stared at her. "You never told me that." "I didn't know it mattered," she said, voice rising. "I thought maybe it was something private, or something Dad was keeping for a reason." Wolfe lifted a hand. "It matters because someone chose to keep the original. They did not destroy it. They preserved it. That indicates forethought." He turned to Jonas. "You were the executor of Gregory Hollis's estate?" "Yes." "Did you know about the letter?" "Number not until the copy arrived. But you had access to everything in the house afterward." "Yes," Jonas said tightly. "Everything except what Gregory had already locked away." Wolfe nodded once. "Then allow me to offer a theory." He reached into his drawer and pulled out the 4th copy, the one Lucy had brought. He laid it beside the others. Then he held up a small envelope, one I had delivered that morning to Dr. Vale's office. "This was addressed to Dr. Vale," Wolfe said, and it was delivered anonymously 6 days ago. He opened it, revealing a second note, not a letter, but a message. You failed to save her once. Let's see what you do now. The room went dead silent. I believe this campaign was not only about guilt, Wolfe said softly. It was about revenge, but not against Ivy, against Quentin Vale. I turned to him. Wolfe, he raised a hand. Who benefits from Ivy's ruin? From dragging this into the open? Not Ivy, not Celeste, not Lucy. But what if someone believed Vale knew something about Gregory's death, or suspected him of covering it up? Quentin frowned. You think someone's framing me? I think someone is punishing you, Wolfe said, because they believe you let something happen that night and because they never forgave you. He looked at Lucy. She froze. No, she said. That's not. You received the cleanest copy, Wolfe said. No smudge. No fold. A copy that had not been stored with the others. Because you didn't get it last week. You made it. You found the original in that book and you kept it. She stood. I didn't. You used Ivy's words to accuse Vale, Wolfe continued, because you believed he was responsible for your grandfather's death. Lucy trembled, her face pale. He was there that night, she said, after everyone was asleep. I heard voices. I was 12. I didn't understand, but I remembered. And I found the letter years later, and it all made sense. Quentin stared at her. Lucy, You didn't kill him, she said, but you knew he was angry. You let Ivy leave. You let it all be forgotten. Wolfe closed his eyes. And you decided it was time for none of them to forget. Lucy sat again, shaking. I wanted someone to say what happened. I didn't want her to take the blame anymore. Wolfe nodded once, slowly. No one will, because what happened cannot be proven, but your actions, Miss Hollis, could have done real harm. Ivy turned to her. You should have asked me. Lucy whispered, I didn't think you'd tell the truth. Ivy took a breath. I was going to, but I needed someone to believe it wasn't my fault first. The room sat in silence. Then Wolfe stood, a rare movement, and everyone noticed. He walked to the window. Truth is often late, he said, but when it arrives, it is best to open the door. He turned back. Good evening. And with that, the gathering ended. Dinner would be late. But for once, even Wolfe didn't mind. By the time the front door closed behind Lucy Hollis, the scent of lilies still hung in the air. It mingled unpleasantly with the faint undertone of damp wool and unspoken things. Wolfe remained by the window for a moment longer, a hand resting on the frame as though holding up the world outside. Then, without a word, he turned and lowered himself back into his chair with the weight of someone settling not just into upholstery, but finality. I stayed standing. That's it then? I asked. No handcuffs, no headlines? Just truth in a box with a bow on it? He didn't answer immediately. He reached for a cigar, but didn't light it. I did not summon them here to deliver them to justice, he said finally. I summoned them to deliver them to themselves. Very poetic, I muttered. But if I may speak bluntly, you may not, he interrupted, though his tone lacked bite. Not yet. I let it go, mostly because I could tell he wasn't finished. Wolfe didn't just solve mysteries, he curated them, arranged them on a shelf somewhere behind his eyes. This one had taken its place, but not without cost. She's not wrong, you know, I said eventually. Lucy. She may have gone about it like a haunted librarian, but someone should have said something 12 years ago. Yes, Wolfe agreed, but they didn't. And the price of deferred truth is always compounded interest. He turned to me fully now, studying me as if he hadn't quite decided whether I was part of the scenery or the plot. Mr. Goodwin, what did you observe in Lucy's demeanor when I accused her? She didn't flinch, I said. She folded. That wasn't guilt. That was weight. Wolfe gave a slight nod. Precisely. You believe she found the letter long ago. I believe, he said, that she has read it hundreds of times. Possibly aloud. Possibly to a mirror. There was a knock at the front door. Fritz had already retired for the night, which meant I got the honors. I made my way through the hall and opened it to find Quentin Vale standing on the stoop, his umbrella folded at his side but unopened. It wasn't raining. He didn't ask if Wolfe was still awake. He just said, "Ivy's waiting in the car." But I needed a word. I stepped aside. "Come in." Wolfe didn't react when I showed him in. Not until Vale sat, uninvited, and crossed one leg over the other like a man who'd already made peace with discomfort. "I wasn't responsible for Gregory's death," Vale said, "but I wasn't innocent either." That earned Wolfe's attention. Barely. "I knew he hated me," Vale continued. "Ivy and I, well, we were reckless. She needed something outside the house, and I needed, I don't know, to be chosen, to matter to someone." He paused. "The night he died, I went to the house to speak to him. Ivy didn't know. I thought if I explained myself, if I gave him something he could hold, evidence that I cared, he'd back off. That's the real reason she wrote the letter. I asked her to. I thought if he saw it, read it in her hand, it might convince him we were serious." Wolfe said nothing. Vale looked down. I arrived late. The house was dark. The front door was unlocked. I heard footsteps above. I waited in the parlor, but no one came. Then I heard a crash. His voice dropped. I didn't run up. I waited. I told myself maybe he fell. Maybe it was nothing. And then I left. "And you told no one?" I asked. He shook his head. "No one. You let her carry that alone," I said. He didn't flinch. "Yes, I did." Wolfe finally moved, just his fingertips drumming once against the armrest. "You've chosen a poor time to confess," he said, "and a poor reason." "I know," Vale said, "but I'm not doing it for absolution. I'm doing it because she deserves the truth. Ivy, I mean. She always did." "And Lucy?" I asked. He met my gaze. "Lucy deserved someone who didn't hide. But I failed her too. That's mine to carry." Wolfe leaned forward. "You will not tell the papers this story. You will not use it to reclaim virtue. You will leave the letter and all its copies with me." Vale nodded. "That's why I came." He reached into his coat pocket and produced a small, neatly folded envelope. It was yellowed at the edges. Time had not been kind. Wolfe took it without comment. As Vale stood to leave, he looked around the room. The books, the orchids beyond, the glass, the soft light of old secrets and sharper minds. "Sometimes," he said, "we're not who we were meant to be. We're just who's left when the damage is done." He left without waiting for a reply. I closed the door behind him. Wolfe was staring at the envelope, his eyes unreadable. I asked, "You going to read it?" He shook his head. "I already have." "Come again?" He held the envelope up. "This is not the original. It's a decoy, a replacement. Very convincing, but the paper is wrong. The weight, too new. Someone wants me to believe the story ends here. You think it doesn't. I know it doesn't." I blinked. Who's left? Wolfe looked up at me, and in his eyes was something almost like regret. "Ivy." My mouth opened, then closed. She was the victim. She was the author. Of the copies? Of the letter? And of its resurrection? He leaned back again. "Think, Archie. She came to us claiming panic. Surprise. But she left here with the envelope. She had it the entire time. I asked her plainly if I could read it. She refused, and then, a day later, multiple versions surface. Conveniently, with no proof of origin. But why now? Because Lucy was asking questions, he said, and because Ivy knew she couldn't outrun the past any longer. So she staged her own absolution. He nodded. She wrote the original letter to persuade Gregory. When that failed and he died, she hid, but she never burned it. She copied it, held on to it, and now, years later, she realized the only way to free herself was to let someone else believe they had uncovered it. I ran a hand through my hair. But that means she orchestrated this, Wolfe said. She baited Lucy, baited Vale, baited you, and baited me. I stared at him. You knew? I suspected, Wolfe said, but suspicion is not enough. I needed confession. Then why let her walk? He looked at me, tired now. Because guilt does not always wear shackles, and because sometimes justice is simply knowing the truth and choosing to live with it. There was nothing to say to that. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, the brownstone settled back into silence. Dinner was finally served, and the letter, real or not, would never leave the office again. By morning, the orchids were misted. Breakfast had been consumed with silent civility, and Wolfe had returned to his chair with the Sunday Gazette folded like a patient expecting a diagnosis. The letter, real or replica, sat in the top right drawer of his desk, unread since the night before. I knew better than to ask whether he planned to keep it there indefinitely or just long enough to forget its contents. At 9:15, the phone rang. I answered, half expecting a journalist sniffing around the edges of the Hollis family drama. Instead, it was Ivy Tennant. "I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe," she said, and her voice was calmer than it should have been. "He's occupied," I said, "but you can speak with me." There was a pause. Not hesitant, calculated. "Tell him I'll be there within the hour." Then she hung up. I replaced the receiver slowly. Wolfe didn't ask who it was. He just turned the page of the Gazette and said, "She's coming to confess." "You don't sound surprised." I'm not. What surprises me is the timing. Something has accelerated her need. I crossed the room and leaned against the desk. "You sure it's not just guilt? You made it pretty clear last night you had her pegged." Wolfe grunted. "Guilt does not accelerate. Fear does." He looked up, eyes sharp behind those lazy lids. "Archie, go to Miss Tennant's apartment. Now before she gets here." Expecting to find what? I'm not sure, but I suspect the past has come calling, and it may not be asking politely. I was out the door in less than 2 minutes. It was a brisk walk, shorter by cab, but I wanted time to think, and Wolfe wanted silence behind him, not tire treads. Ivy's building was quiet, as it had been before, and the same doorman was on duty. He gave me a nod of recognition, though his expression was tighter today. "She left 10 minutes ago," he said. "Alone, but she looked tense." "Did anyone visit her?" "Number. But I think someone was parked across the street all morning." He pointed, and I followed his line of sight to a dark blue sedan. Empty now, but with a faint ring of condensation on the driver's side window. "Did you get a look at the driver?" "Not clearly. But he didn't look like a cabbie, and he sure didn't look like a friend." I thanked him and took the elevator up. Her door was ajar. Now, I've walked into worse situations than a lady's apartment with a swinging door, but not many with more tension per square foot. I stepped inside slowly, hand just near my jacket pocket where my snub nose rested. Not drawn, just available. The apartment was undisturbed, almost too undisturbed. No signs of forced entry, no papers out of place. But near the writing desk, a drawer hung slightly open. Inside, stationery, envelopes, and a single sheet of paper, half written, the ink still faintly wet. I read it twice before folding it gently and tucking it inside my coat. It was a note. Not to Wolfe. Not to me. To Lucy. Ivy had been trying to write a confession, or perhaps a final defense. Either way, she hadn't finished. I was back at the brownstone 15 minutes later. "She left this behind," I said, handing Wolfe the letter. He read it silently. His mouth never moved, but his eyes tightened the way they do when something inside him shifts, just a little. Then he handed it back. "She's not coming," he said flatly. I frowned. She said she'd be here. "Ivy Tennant does not leave a door ajar by mistake," Wolfe said. "She left it open because she wanted it found." "By who?" Gave me a look. "You, or whoever came first. She wrote that note to Lucy and left it behind, not delivered. That implies urgency, but also fear. She was planning to explain something she couldn't say aloud." I stepped back. "You think someone followed her?" "I think someone intercepted her before she could reach us." The phone rang again. I picked it up, already bracing. This time it was Inspector Kramer. "Goodwin," he growled. "I need Wolfe." "Now." "Morning to you, too." "Don't play cute. A woman was found in Riverside Park, Ivy Tennant, alive but barely. Someone hit her, hard, and rolled her down a shallow embankment. We've got her in the hospital." I relayed the news. Wolfe didn't move, but his fingers gripped the arms of his chair with just enough pressure to make the leather protest. "Do they have a suspect?" he asked. "Nothing solid. But the officers found something in her coat." "What?" "A copy of that damned letter." Kramer sounded tired. More tired than usual, like the kind of tired that comes when the puzzle pieces finally start to form a picture you don't like. "We need Wolfe to tell us how this mess connects," he added. "He already knows," I said, "but he's not fond of sharing." Wolfe took the phone from me. "Inspector," he said, "bring Miss Lucy Hollis to the brownstone within the hour. Alone." "Why?" "Because she's the only one who doesn't yet realize the story isn't over." He hung up. I looked at him. "You think Lucy hit her?" "Number but Lucy knows who did, and she may not know she knows." The pieces were moving fast now, too fast. I had to race ahead to keep up with Wolfe's deductions, and for once I felt a step behind. "She staged the letter release," I said. "Used it to trigger confessions, force the past into daylight, but someone didn't like the daylight." Wolfe nodded. "Someone who benefited from silence, who had motive, not 12 years ago, but now. Someone who feared what Ivy's return would expose." I frowned. "Jonas?" Wolfe's silence answered me. "Jonas Hollis, Ivy's brother-in-law. Executor of the estate, keeper of the books. Quiet man with a quiet office and a daughter who stumbled onto a letter she shouldn't have had." "You think he found out about Lucy's involvement?" I asked. I think he found out she was getting close to discovering something else. Something that would cast light on Gregory Hollis's true demise. But Gregory's death was ruled an accident. Because Jonas ensured it would be," Wolfe said. "And Ivy's letter could be twisted into implication, which Jonas feared. So he tried to silence her. Too late." I didn't ask how Wolfe knew. I just asked what he wanted me to do. "Be ready," he said. "Miss Hollis will be here soon, and when she is, we'll need more than polite conversation." He closed the drawer where the fake letter rested. And for the first time that day, he looked tired. Not from the mystery, but from the weight of truths he couldn't unread. At 10:42 a.m., Lucy Hollis stepped into the brownstone like someone entering a museum of her own memories. She was pale, but not from fear. Her expression was tightly composed, the way people look when they're trying to stay ahead of what they already suspect. I met her at the door, took her coat without a word, and led her to the office, where Wolfe waited beneath the soft hush of filtered daylight and the quiet hum of everything unsaid. She didn't sit until Wolfe gestured, and even then she perched on the edge of the red chair, spine stiff, eyes scanning the room like it might hold answers in the floorboards. "Thank you for coming," Wolfe said. Lucy nodded. "Kramer said it was important." "It is," Wolfe said. "Miss Tennant is alive, but unconscious. I heard, she said softly. He didn't say much, just that someone hurt her. You were at home this morning? I asked. She looked at me directly. Yes, with my mother. And your father? She hesitated. He left early for the office. He hasn't come back. Wolfe folded his hands over his stomach. Miss Hollis, I'm going to speak plainly now. You are free to leave at any time, but I advise you to stay. This concerns you. She didn't move. Wolfe continued, You received the original letter long before the others did. You made a copy, perhaps more than one, but you believed until recently that the past, while ugly, was complete. Then Ivy returned, and you began asking questions. Lucy's voice was barely above a whisper. I needed to know why she left, why no one spoke about it. Indeed. And in asking, you uncovered not guilt, but manipulation. Your father had access to the original letter 12 years ago. He had motive to keep it hidden. Her lips parted, but Wolfe held up a hand. You were a child then, but old enough to remember his voice, his actions, the tension in the house. Gregory Hollis died under ambiguous circumstances, and Jonas Hollis ensured it stayed that way. I don't understand, she said, though her voice said otherwise. Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said, if you please. I pulled the sheet of paper from my coat, the one Ivy had left half-finished at her desk. I handed it to Lucy. She took it carefully, unfolding it with slow fingers. As she read, her eyes widened, not in surprise, but in recognition. She wrote this morning, she murmured. She did, Wolfe said. She intended to bring it here, but she was intercepted before she could arrive. Lucy looked up sharply. You think my father. I think your father saw that the truth he buried 12 years ago was beginning to rise, Wolfe said. And he acted, not out of rage, but out of fear. She shook her head, almost involuntarily. He wouldn't hurt her. No? Wolfe asked. Gently. He covered up a death. He altered legal records. He tampered with a letter that could have implicated the family in scandal. Miss Hollis, your father's specialty is not violence. It is prevention. She closed her eyes. He said he didn't want me digging, that it would hurt people. He was right, Wolfe said, but not in the way he meant. I watched Lucy closely. There was a tremble now. Not the tremble of someone who doubted what they were hearing, but of someone who had known it deeply and tried not to. My mother never asked, she said. She just moved forward. And so did your father, Wolfe replied. But the truth, once buried, tends to flower in strange places. There was a knock at the door. I moved quickly. At the threshold stood Inspector Kramer, red-faced and solid, flanked by 2 uniforms and, just behind him, Jonas Hollis. He looked composed, trim coat, briefcase, but his eyes were tight, too tight. I stepped aside and Wolfe didn't rise, but he turned his full attention on the man as he entered. Kramer gave a short nod. We found him halfway across the park, near the tennis courts. Was he running? Wolfe asked. No, Kramer said. Just walking, calm as a monk. Jonas stood in the center of the room. He looked at Lucy, then at Wolfe, then back again. I suppose, he said. You think you've solved it. Wolfe's voice was cool. That would depend on what you intend to admit. Jonas sighed, then walked forward and set his briefcase on the desk. I didn't try to kill her, he said. Let's get that straight. I found out she was heading here. I wanted to intercept her, just to talk. That's all? You struck her, Kramer said. There was blunt trauma. She panicked, Jonas said. She turned. I reached for her arm and she fell. That's the truth. You left her in a ditch, I said coldly. He didn't answer. Wolfe leaned forward. Why did you fear her coming here? Because it would all come out, Jonas said quietly. The letter. The inheritance. What I did. Which was. He didn't look at Lucy. Your grandfather died from a fall. That's true. But he had a condition. One I'd known about for months. He had been warned not to take the stairs without support. That night, after the fight with Ivy, I found him at the top of the landing, agitated, unsteady. I didn't stop him. I just let him go. And then, Wolfe prompted. I found the letter the next day, in his study. I knew what it would look like. Ivy would be blamed. The scandal would ruin her, the family, everything. So I made it disappear. You burned it? I thought I did, Jonas said. But a copy had already been made. I never found it. Wolfe tilted his head. Until Lucy did. Jonas nodded. And then Ivy came back. And I knew everything was going to surface. You couldn't just let her speak? I thought I could manage it. Control it. But when I saw that she was writing again, planning to hand Wolfe something, I panicked. Kramer folded his arms. So you intercepted her, to talk? Yes, Jonas said. But she slipped. I swear it, I didn't mean to hurt her. Kramer looked at Wolfe. You believe that? I believe, Wolfe said slowly, that Jonas Hollis is a man whose worst crimes are ones of omission, and that omission, Inspector, led to Ivy Tennant's suffering, not once, but twice. Lucy stood. I don't want to testify, she said. You may not have to, Wolfe replied. He will confess, or Kramer will press him until he does. Kramer nodded. We've got enough. Jonas didn't resist. As he was led away, he turned to Lucy once. I did it for all of us, he said. She didn't reply. The door closed. Wolfe exhaled once, slow and deep. Lucy turned to him. Will she be all right? Ivy is strong, Wolfe said. She always has been. She won't forgive him. She needn't, he said. Some things are best left unforgiven. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. She nodded. Thank you. I walked her out. As she stepped into the sunlight, I saw her shoulders straighten, not with pride, but with release. Back inside, Wolfe had already reached for the Gazette again. Breakfast tomorrow? I asked. Eggs. Soft, he said. And toast. Dry, I smiled. The brownstone, at last, was quiet again, but not unchanged. By the time Lucy Hollis disappeared down the front steps and into the city's cautious midday sunlight, the weight that had been hanging over the brownstone like a misplaced chandelier began to shift. Not disappear, but reposition itself. There are some truths that don't clear the air. They just change its pressure. Wolfe hadn't moved from his chair, though the Gazette now rested untouched in his lap, or the pages slightly curled from his thumb. Will she press charges? I asked, standing near the door with one eye on the glass panel that still held the outline of Lucy's exit. She may, Wolfe said, but it will not be for our benefit. I raised an eyebrow. You mean she'll do it to reclaim the narrative? No, Wolfe replied, finally setting the paper aside. She'll do it to reclaim herself. The words hung for a beat. I hadn't expected philosophy before lunch, but Wolfe was still in that strange mood he reserved for the aftermath of emotional entanglements. Detached, but reflective, as if filing human pain into neat taxonomies. He closed the drawer where Ivy's half-finished letter now sat among older, quieter files, then leaned back and laced his fingers over his chest. Jonas Hollis, he said, did not intend to kill anyone, not his father-in-law, and not Miss Tennant, but like many men of his breed, he underestimated the consequences of cowardice. I moved toward the liquor cabinet and poured myself a small bourbon. Is that your final verdict, Judge Wolfe? No, he said calmly. It is merely an observation. The verdict will belong to the district attorney. I have no interest in legal censure, only in clarity. I took a sip, letting the silence stretch. Then I turned. You still believe Ivy orchestrated the first wave of letters, don't you? I know she did, Wolfe said. No one else had both the motive and the access. She feared that Lucy's curiosity would uncover the truth, and in doing so, reshape it into something even uglier than it already was. So she offered it preemptively, wrapped in sorrow, framed as confession, but controlled. I leaned on the edge of my desk. So all this time she was trying to rewrite the narrative. She was trying to survive it, Wolfe said. The letter 12 years ago was written in desperation. The copies now were written in defense. That's a hell of a gamble, I said. To play puppeteer with a room full of broken strings. Yes, Wolfe murmured, but she knew how to pull gently. That is what separates a manipulator from a strategist. I opened my mouth to reply, but was interrupted by the buzz from the front hallway. Fritz's voice came through the intercom with a subtle note of apology. Miss Tennant is here. I froze. She's walking. So it seems, Fritz replied. Wolfe's eyes opened wider than I'd seen in 2 days. Bring her in. I moved fast, crossing the foyer in a few strides, and there she was, slimmer than before, pale but upright. A small strip of gauze at her temple, a fresh coat, pressed slacks, low heels, not dressed for recovery, dressed for resolution. You're supposed to be in a hospital bed, I said, opening the door wider. I discharged myself, she said, brushing past me. They wanted to keep me overnight. I didn't want to stay horizontal. She made it to Wolfe's office under her own power, declining help with a short shake of the head. I see the rumors of your collapse were exaggerated, Wolfe said, not rising. I didn't collapse, Ivy replied, settling into the red chair for the 3rd time in as many days. I was knocked down, briefly, and not quite as hard as he thought. I moved to my chair and waited. Wolfe didn't press her, not right away. He studied her the way he studied chess positions, knowing the final move, waiting to see if the board knew it too. I've come, she said at last, because you already know everything. Yes, Wolfe said, but you haven't said it. She folded her hands, calm now. I sent the copies, she said. I made them years ago, not to use, but to remind myself of what I almost said and what I never did. You delivered one to Celeste, one to Quentin, and one to Lucy, Wolfe asked. No, she said. Just Celeste and Quentin. I didn't send one to Lucy. Wolfe tilted his head. But Lucy received one. I know, Ivy said softly, which means someone else found the original. She reached into her coat and removed a small leather envelope, faded red wax, hand addressed. This, she said, is the actual letter. The one I thought I had burned. I found it yesterday, tucked inside a book in the apartment my father used to keep as a study. It was wedged behind a shelf, dusty, hidden, not destroyed. Wolfe took it, examining it with just the tips of his fingers. You are certain this was not planted? Yes, she said. I would know my own handwriting. He didn't open it. Then who delivered it to Lucy? I think Jonas did, she said. Long ago, quietly, as insurance, but he never said anything. I asked, so how did it come back into circulation? She looked at me, and for once I saw not strategy but fatigue. Because Lucy found it, and she thought it meant more than it did. I looked at Wolfe. That changes the timing. She found it recently, before you sent your copies. Ivy nodded. I didn't know. When I sent the others, I believed I was controlling the storm, but Lucy was already walking into it. Wolfe placed the letter on the desk, like one might place a loaded gun with no safety. Do you regret it? He asked. She took a long breath. Number I regret nothing that reveals the truth, only the damage it does along the way. He closed his eyes briefly. So do we all. She stood, her hand steady on the armrest. I'm leaving New York. Permanently? Wolfe asked. For now, she said. Lucy has a life to repair, and I have one to rebuild. We can't do that near each other." Wolfe didn't argue. He just nodded once. At the door, she turned back. "You were right, you know," she said. "It wasn't a letter of guilt. It was a letter of grief. And grief, like guilt, can rot if you keep it too quiet too long." Then she was gone. Wolfe watched the door for several moments after it clicked shut. Then he said, "You may close the file, Mr. Goodwin." "You sure?" "Yes," he said. "The case is done." I leaned back and stared out the window. Outside, the city kept moving, people crossing streets, holding umbrellas they didn't need, hurrying toward futures they didn't know would loop back to old truths. "You ever wonder," I asked, "how many letters people never send?" Wolfe closed his eyes again. "No," he said. "I wonder how many are sent, and read far too late." And in the stillness of that answer, we let the silence have the last word. The following morning began in the quietest way possible. Fritz humming softly in the kitchen, the subtle hiss of the espresso machine warming, and the rustle of the newspaper beneath Wolfe's steady hands. The front page bore no mention of Ivy Tennant, no photos of Jonas Hollis in cuffs. The world had turned without noticing what nearly came undone inside a brownstone dining room or a shallow ditch in Riverside Park. I was halfway through my coffee when Wolfe cleared his throat. I didn't look up. "You've been unusually silent this morning," he said. I shrugged. "You solved it. What's left to say?" He didn't press, which told me he knew exactly what was bothering me. So I said it. "There's something unfinished about it." Wolfe looked up. "Unfinished?" "Jonas gets arraigned. Ivy vanishes. Lucy's somewhere trying to decide whether she hates her father or just resents the gravity of his silence." "And you?" "Yes," he asked, more amused than irritated. "You put it all into a folder, as if a life like that can be filed away." Wolfe leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming once against the armrest. "You're dissatisfied because there was no triumph," he said. "No epiphany, no single moment where the pieces clicked into place with satisfying symmetry." "That's part of it," I admitted. He studied me, eyes narrowing slightly. "Do you recall," he said, "the case with the pharmacist who poisoned his own son's dog to avoid paying boarding fees?" I grimaced. "Unfortunately." "You were similarly disturbed then, and again when we untangled the embezzlement ring at the private school and found it led to the bursar's widow." I didn't answer. Wolfe nodded as if he'd proven a theorem. "You dislike endings without justice," he said. "I dislike endings that feel like footnotes," I muttered. "Then you would do well to remember," Wolfe said, "that some truths are not decisive. They are chronic." Before I could respond, the phone rang. I answered, expecting Kramer with some residual grumble about paperwork or a reporter fishing for background. Instead, it was Lucy. "Mr. Goodwin?" she asked. "Yes." "I need to see Mr. Wolfe. Now, please." Something in her tone turned the temperature in the room down 10 degrees. "Is this about your father?" "No," she said. "It's about my mother." I covered the receiver. "It's Lucy. She says it's urgent." Wolfe sighed. "Bring her." She arrived less than 20 minutes later, dressed in a charcoal coat 2 sizes too large, sleeves bunched at her wrists. Her eyes were dry, but something behind them flickered like a flame starved for oxygen. I led her into the office. Wolfe nodded at her once. "Miss Hollis." "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "I need your help again. Not as a detective, as someone who understands people better than they want to be understood." That earned a blink from Wolfe. "Continue." She took a breath. "After my father was arrested, my mother became still. Not angry, not grieving, just still. Like someone hit pause. She stopped speaking much, kept to herself. At first I thought it was shock. But it wasn't, I said. No. She reached into her purse and handed me a small, leather-bound journal. Old, worn. Embossed initials on the front. C.H. Wolfe leaned forward, eyes sharpening. Celeste Hollis, he murmured. She kept a diary, Lucy said. I found it last night, hidden behind a panel in the dressing room. I opened to the bookmarked page. The handwriting was delicate, looping. A woman trained to never rush her words. I read it aloud. Gregory said it again tonight, that I married beneath my station, that Jonas was only ever clever, not strong. He will not change the will. I begged, I pleaded. He laughed. He said Ivy could have the house, and Jonas would get his name in a ledger and nothing more. I'm so tired of watching him decide everything. I stopped reading. Wolfe gestured. Go on. I flipped forward 3 pages. It's done. I waited until he was alone. The banister was loose. It always has been. I knew the angle. He would grab it. It would give. He wouldn't know. He would never see me behind the curtain. And now it's over. Jonas thinks it was fate, but fate needed help. I looked up slowly. She did it? Lucy nodded. My mother killed him. And told no one, Wolfe said. Not even her husband. She let him carry the guilt, I said. She needed him too, Wolfe replied. Because if anyone had investigated too closely, Jonas would have been a perfect suspect, protective, ambitious, but never calculating enough to push. Lucy looked exhausted. And now he's in custody, and she's pretending to be the widow again, the victim. I handed Wolfe the journal. He didn't touch it. Do you want justice? He asked her. Legal, public, definitive justice? Lucy hesitated. I want truth, she said, even if it's quiet. Wolfe nodded. Then do nothing. She blinked. What? Do nothing, he repeated. Let your father face trial for what he attempted. Not what he didn't do. He concealed a truth. He tampered with evidence. Those are his crimes. But the greater sin, your grandfather's death, was not his. And Celeste Hollis will carry that, whether she is ever named or not. Lucy stood there, trembling. She'll never say it, she said. She already has, Wolfe said, motioning to the journal. And she chose the one person she never thought would find it. You, I added. If we turn this over, it becomes spectacle. If you keep it, it becomes mine, she said quietly, to decide what to do with. Wolfe leaned back. Precisely. She took the journal, holding it as if it weighed more now. Maybe it did. Thank you, she said, for seeing what I couldn't. She left with slower steps than she'd come in with, but steadier. After the door closed, Wolfe closed his eyes. Well, I said, I didn't expect that twist. Few truths arrive when we expect them, Wolfe murmured. You think she'll keep it to herself? For now, he said, and perhaps that is justice enough. I returned to my desk. Wolfe reached again for his newspaper, but didn't open it. He was still listening to the silence. And I let it speak. Lucy's footsteps faded down the front stairs, the creak of the brownstone's door closing behind her like a punctuation mark at the end of an unfinished sentence. I stayed seated at my desk, hands motionless on the edge of the blotter, watching Wolfe through the soft glow of late morning light. He hadn't moved since she left. His eyes were open, but fixed, like he was watching something only he could see, some final shape forming in the distance. She'll never turn it in, I said quietly. The diary? No, Wolfe murmured. Nor should she. She's sitting on a confession. Her mother murdered Gregory Hollis, let Jonas bear the weight, and now she's... What? Quietly reflecting over tea. He finally looked at me. Your indignation is late, Archie. Does that matter? He allowed himself a small exhale. Number, but it's worth noting. You're angry now because the story lacks consequence. But consequence, in this case, is already embedded. Jonas Hollis is incarcerated. Ivy Tennant nearly died. And Celeste Hollis, whether she ends her days in public shame or private silence, is already living her punishment. I still think someone should know, I said. Someone does, Wolfe replied. We sat in silence for a few moments longer, the office settling around us like it always did after a storm, papers squared, dust undisturbed, the orchids in the glass house glowing faintly under artificial light. Fritz was moving in the kitchen with the soft rhythm of soup preparation, and the sky outside was overcast but calm. The peace didn't last. At precisely 11:17 a.m., the doorbell rang again. I checked Wolfe's expression. He showed no surprise, and made my way to the front, half expecting Lucy again. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe Celeste had noticed the missing journal. Maybe the past had one last twist to offer. But it wasn't Lucy. It was Saul Panzer. He looked as unbothered as ever, a newspaper folded under one arm, the faint scent of subway tunnels and street dust still clinging to his coat. "Got something," he said simply. I opened the door fully. "Come on in. Wolfe's expecting you." "No, he's not," Saul said. "But he'll want this." In the office, Wolfe's eyes flicked toward him as he entered. He didn't stand, but he didn't close his eyes either. That was as much of a welcome as Saul ever got. "I wasn't aware you were working an angle," Wolfe said. "You didn't ask," Saul replied. Wolfe gestured toward the red chair. "Proceed." Saul remained standing. "You wanted to know where Lucy got the original letter. You believed Jonas gave it to her, that it had been passed down deliberately." Wolfe nodded once. "Well," Saul said, "you're half right." That got Wolfe's attention. "It was passed down," Saul continued, "but not by Jonas. The original letter, the one Ivy wrote the night Gregory died, never left the Hollis house. It was hidden. Someone else found it, someone young, someone who didn't know what they were reading." I frowned. "You're saying Lucy didn't find it?" "She found a copy," Saul corrected. "A new one, fresh paper, fresh print. I checked the ink residue against her stationery drawer. It wasn't from her house. Wasn't from Ivy's either." "Then where?" Wolfe asked. Saul reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph. "From a storage unit registered to Celeste Hollis, paid for annually, under a false name. I checked the billing address. It tied back to an old P.O. box Jonas once used for freelance legal work, but Celeste handled the payment, not him." He placed the photo on Wolfe's desk. It showed a metal box, dusty but intact, sitting among boxes labeled with years: 2009, 2011, 2014. Neatly stacked, organized like a ledger of shadows. Inside the box was a collection of personal papers, letters, and, sitting on top, one very familiar cream-colored envelope, sealed in red wax. "I opened the unit this morning," Saul said. "There were 6 copies of the letter, all printed, all preserved, not folded, unsent." Wolfe didn't speak. Saul continued. "I also found an old cassette recorder, dictation style, the kind Ivy used at the gallery. One of the tapes was labeled Letter-First Draft." Wolfe reached forward, slowly, and pulled the photo closer. Saul added, "It wasn't Ivy's voice." That landed like a thunderclap. I leaned in. "What do you mean it wasn't her?" "It was Celeste's," Saul said, reading the letter aloud. "No," I said. "She wouldn't." "She would," Wolfe cut in. "And she did." He looked at Saul. "You're certain?" Saul nodded. "Same cadence as her public talks. She used to host historical lecture series. There are recordings online. No question." I turned to Wolfe. "So the letter was fake?" "No," Wolfe said. "It was real. But Celeste controlled its use. She made the copies. She stored them, and she waited." "For what?" I asked. For the right time, Wolfe said. For leverage, or protection, or simply to remind Ivy who still held the reins. But Ivy found the real letter, I said. She thought she did, Wolfe replied. But she never did. She found what Celeste wanted her to find. Celeste curated the entire descent. Saul added, and when Lucy stumbled into the mess, Celeste let it happen. Then why the diary? I asked. Why leave that confession for Lucy? Wolfe looked almost grim. Because she knew she was finished, he said, the moment Ivy reappeared. Celeste didn't write the diary for redemption. She wrote it because she couldn't stop writing. Some people control through words, and when they lose that control, they leave it behind in the only way they can, as legacy. I exhaled slowly. So the real puppeteer was never Ivy. No, Wolfe said. Ivy tried to tell her story, but she was always speaking from a script someone else had written. Saul handed Wolfe a second envelope. There's one more thing. Inside was a short letter, unsigned, typewritten, neutral tone. It read, If you ever return, so will it. Don't forget who protected you when no one else did. Saul said it was mailed to Ivy's gallery in San Francisco, postmarked 6 months ago. Wolfe didn't need to ask who sent it. The silence afterward wasn't heavy. It was surgical, the final slice through the last illusion. I looked at Wolfe. So what now? Now, Wolfe said. We do nothing. Again. Nothing, he nodded. Celeste Hollis is beyond reach, but she is not beyond memory. And memory, Mr. Goodwin, is often the sharpest punishment. Saul stood. You want me to box the evidence? Yes, but lock it here, Wolfe said. Not the police, not the papers. Let the truth rest. After Saul left, Wolfe turned to me. You wished for consequence, he said. You now have it. You wished for clarity. You have that as well. And still you are unsatisfied. I didn't argue. Instead, I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the sky had broken. Sunlight filtered through the clouds like it was apologizing. I said, it's a strange thing. What is? To chase truth and find silence. Wolfe closed his eyes. That, he said, is the nature of most truths worth chasing. In this time, I agreed. The brown stone was quiet again. Saul had left, the cassette locked away with the rest of Celeste Hollis's curated cruelty. The orchid room had resumed its hum, and Wolfe was working his way through a slice of poached pear with the same care he applied to hostile testimony. Everything in its place. Everything as it had been. And yet the air in the office felt changed. Not disturbed, just denser somehow, like a story had ended, but the dust hadn't settled. I stood at the window, watching the street. You think she ever meant for anyone to hear it? The recording? Wolfe asked, not looking up from his plate. I nodded. Number. But she couldn't help herself. A woman like Celeste Hollis always documents. Memory, for her, is not a burden. It is a mechanism. She wrote things down so she could believe she was in control of them. I turned back, and when she wasn't, she revised, Wolfe said simply, until her version was the only one left. That made me think of Ivy, of Lucy, of the Hollis house and the way silence had become its furniture. You know what still bugs me? I asked. I can guess, Wolfe said, setting down his fork. We let a murderer walk. Celeste kills Gregory. Jonas buries the truth. Ivy nearly dies. Lucy's left holding a diary that reads like a weapon. And somehow, none of them face a courtroom. Wolfe reached for his napkin, dabbing the corners of his mouth. You mistake justice for symmetry, Mr. Goodwin, he said. Justice is not balance. It is recognition. Sometimes the most a person can be given is the chance to see what was hidden and to decide how to live with it. I sat. Lucy won't publish it. No, Wolfe said. But she will remember it. and she will never again accept silence as virtue. And Ivy? She will recover, he said. She has already begun to reclaim her voice. You heard it in her last words here. She said grief can rot if it's left too quiet. Precisely, Wolfe murmured. We sat for a moment, the ticking of the wall clock the only sound between us. Then Wolfe added, Miss Tennant, in her way, solved the case. I raised an eyebrow. How do you figure? She forced everyone to listen, he said. Not just to her, to the past, to what they had all been ignoring. She lit the match. I merely traced the smoke. I smiled in spite of myself. You really hate taking credit, don't you? I detest taking credit for what was inevitable, he replied. Jonas Hollis would have broken. Celeste would have slipped. Ivy would have returned. My role was to listen before the others learned how. I leaned back, folding my hands behind my head. You're something, Wolfe. I am myself, he said. And with that, he reached for a book. It was always like that with Wolfe. The case closed not with applause or declarations, but with a single, deliberate gesture, folding a napkin, opening a book, letting the quiet take over. But this time, the quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. As I rose to grab my coat, Wolfe spoke once more, without looking up. Archie. Yeah? There is a letter in the top drawer. Ivy's original. What about it? Burn it. I paused. Seriously? Yes. You sure you don't want it catalogued, filed, boxed in some temperature-controlled vault of personal victories? Wolfe looked up at last, and there was something rare in his expression. Fatigue, yes, but also something like mercy. No, he said, because that letter has done enough damage. Let it end. So I walked to the drawer, took out the envelope, still sealed, still heavy with history, and walked it to the fireplace. No drama, no speech, just a flick of the match. The paper curled, folded in on itself, and then became smoke. It didn't scream, it didn't whisper, it just disappeared, and in the brownstone, for the first time in days, there was nothing left but peace, 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 left but peace,